I hate to say it, but here comes another video that I have to start with a content warning. I'm going to be discussing a really disturbing case of sexual assault on a child. So if that's too much for you, you might want to give this one a skip. As I've mentioned before, the conservative, religious right-controlled United States Supreme Court recently overturned Roe v. Wade, which immediately led to abortion being banned in South Dakota, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Alabama, and so incredibly restricted that it is essentially banned in South Carolina, Tennessee, and Ohio. Millions of people live in these states and are currently suffering from the archaic legislation that is now the law of the land. Not just women, not just people with functional uteruses, but a huge swath of people are negatively affected by this. For instance, 1.3 million Americans have rheumatoid arthritis, which is often treated with a drug called methotrexate. It's also used to treat lupus, Crohn's disease, colitis, and some forms of cancer. Oh, and when used in conjunction with misoprostol, it can be used to induce an abortion. Because of that, as the British Medical Journal recently reported, pharmacists in some of those states can now actually be prosecuted and jailed for filling those prescriptions, meaning that people who rely upon methotrexate to live a normal life can no longer do so. And even if they can find a pharmacist who will fill it, many women and others with working uteruses may be scared to even take the drug because it can cause birth defects. So if they accidentally get pregnant while taking it, they would be unable to abort a fetus that might end up horribly disfigured. Even if it's, unlikely to survive, they wouldn't be able to get an abortion. And this is just the sort of thing that happens when states care more about controlling women's bodies than they do about protecting vulnerable people. Who cares about those losers? I'm sure this anti-abortion law from 1880 is going to be just fine. Oh, you didn't think I was being hyperbolic there, did you? Because people in Arizona are now subject to a law passed in 1864, according to their Attorney General, Mark Brnovich. That law predates Arizona's own statehood and the United States officially deciding that Black people shouldn't be property anymore. So that's fun. Ohio's pre-existing legislation determined that abortion would be restricted to 6 weeks or less, long before most people even know that they're pregnant, and a full 4 weeks before the embryo is even considered a fetus. It's just an embryo. It's 5 millimeters long and looks like a naked mole rat. There's no consideration for cases of rape or incest. So if you don't immediately get a pregnancy test, whether you've missed a period yet or not, you're shit out of luck and you'll have to travel to another state if you don't want to bear your rapist's baby. There was a bit of a to-do earlier this month when the Indianapolis Star published an article about the people who began flooding across the Ohio-Indiana border to access basic reproductive health care within days of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. The article cited a local obstetrician gynecologist, OBGYN, who received a phone call from a child abuse doctor in Ohio who needed her help. He had a 10-year-old patient who was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant, meaning that she could not get an abortion in that state and would need to travel to Indiana, where at the time abortions were still legal up to 22 weeks, although Republican lawmakers in Indiana are trying to pass more severe limitations. Let's get a few things crystal clear. First of all, I shouldn't have to say this, but we live in a nightmarish dystopia, so for the record, no 10-year-old can consent to sex. Any 10-year-old who is pregnant has been raped in order to get into the situation of being pregnant. That's how pregnancy works. Second of all, this isn't just about whether or not she morally should get an abortion or have her rapist baby and put it up for adoption. A 10-year-old simply does not have the ability to safely carry a baby for 9 months. And she absolutely cannot safely give birth naturally. You may know that women tend to have wider hips than men. But in fact, we all have about the same width of pelvis up until puberty. When we hit puberty, male pelvises tend to continue growing at the same rate, while female hormones lead the pelvis to begin drastically widening in a more dramatic fashion. This is not an immediate process. Your pelvis doesn't just pop open. And in fact, researchers have found that most women won't reach their full pelvis width until they're 25 to 30. That's 10 or 20 years of development to get to the point where the pelvis is ready to give birth, less likely to present a problem birthing a fully developed baby. A 10-year-old girl has absolutely no chance. So not only did the United States Supreme Court and Ohio legislators decide that a woman should be forced to carry and give birth to her rapist child, but they decided a 10-year-old girl should do so at significant risk to her own health. There's a vague exemption in Ohio for allowing abortion when it presents a clear risk to the life of the mother. But in this case, the girl's doctors were obviously worried that that wasn't going to apply because, 10-year-olds have given birth and lived before, so why not this time? If you find it appalling, disgusting, unthinkable that a collection of mostly older men would force a 10-year-old child to go through this after she's already been raped, you're not alone. It's bad enough that any person should be forced to gestate a human against their will, especially in a country that already mandates that you can't even remove a healthy organ from a corpse that doesn't need it anymore without that corpse's prior approval. But a 10-year-old rape victim? Surely we can all agree that that's not okay. Your choice then becomes this. Either accept that we can not all agree that that's not okay because some people are monsters, or you can just insist that this story cannot be true. And a lot of people defaulted to the latter. Some of them because they couldn't bear the truth, and others because they are the actual old men who caused this to happen and they don't want you to know about it. Like Ohio Republican Representative Jim Jordan, formerly famous for coaching a wrestling team, several members of whom claim that he stood by and did nothing while the team's physician sexually abused them. Glenn Kessler over at the Washington Post helped carry some water for those guys, posting a fact check of the story of the 10-year-old rape victim. Kessler complained that the quoted OBGYN is the only source, that he was unable to confirm that there was a police report about a 10-year-old being raped in Ohio, and that an abortion of a 10-year-old is pretty rare. So he says the story is impossible to confirm. Let's take those in order. The doctor was the only source, but that's the way it is when we're talking about private medical data. Laws protect us as individuals from reporters, politicians, or others from accessing information about medical procedures that we have had or are having. The law is especially strict regarding children, which this rape victim, I will remind you, is. She is a child. Which brings us to our next point. Kessler couldn't find a police report to confirm that a 10-year-old had been raped in Ohio. Again, a pregnant 10-year-old has, by definition, been raped. That's not just my crazy feminist opinion. That's the opinion of every legislature in every state. An unmarried 10-year-old cannot consent. And yes, I have to say unmarried here because, again, we live in a nightmarish dystopia, and 9 states, including my own, do not set a minimum age for marriage, only requiring parental and or judicial approval. And federal law states that statutory rape doesn't count if the rapist is married to their victim. But yes, this unmarried 10-year-old girl was raped, whether a police report was filed or not. That said, a police report was filed by the girl's parent immediately after they learned of that rape. The Ohio Capitol Journal contacted just one police department, the Columbus, Ohio Police Department, and from their data learned that since March 15th, 2022, there have been 59 reports of sexual assaults of girls 15 and younger that, based on the information available, could have resulted in pregnancy. At least one involved a 10-year-old victim. Just a few days later, the Columbus Dispatch confirmed that a 27-year-old man had been arrested for raping a 10-year-old girl, resulting in her falling pregnant. Finally, Kessler argued that an abortion of a 10-year-old is, quote, pretty rare, which is interesting because he immediately follows that statement with the Columbus Dispatch reported that in 2020, 52 people under the age of 15 received an abortion in Ohio. Rare is a relative term, but if you ask me, one child getting an abortion every single week in just one city in Ohio doesn't qualify as rare. I would call that frequent and fucked up. And what the fuck is wrong with you that you think that that's rare? And finally, why the fuck would it matter if it's rare anyway? If it can happen once, it can happen again, you worthless bucket of turds. It's disgusting that this was published in any newspaper at all, let alone the Washington Post, but we are currently living in a nightmarish dystopia. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet. So, of course, our most respected newspapers are helping alt-right misogynistic theocrats cover up the fact that they have zero empathy or respect for women's bodily autonomy, to the point that they will literally sacrifice a child to maintain their power. I hope the people of Ohio are able to see past the obfuscation and the lies to vote these pieces of shit out of office and fix this to at least try to protect next year's 5th grade class.